Marissa Carter had spent 15 years climbing the corporate ladder, only to find herself at the bottom of it in a single afternoon. It was supposed to be a routine Monday. She had walked into Carter and Finch, a name that once felt as solid as the foundation of her mortgage, expecting another day of crunching numbers, approving budgets, and dodging the ever-present politics of upper management. Instead, she was handed a white envelope with her name typed in cold, indifferent letters. Due to company restructuring, your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. The words echoed in her mind as she sat frozen in her leather chair, the one she had carefully adjusted for optimal lumbar support over the years. Across from her, Human Resources Director Emily Shaw recited the usual script: severance package details, COBRA health insurance options, recommendations for career coaching. Marissa barely heard a word. This must be a mistake, she finally managed to say, her voice cracking. I've been here for 15 years. I helped build this company. Emily offered a sympathetic smile, the kind that wasn't meant to comfort but to politely close the conversation. I know this is difficult, Marissa. But it's not personal. The decision was made at the executive level. Not personal. The phrase burned in her chest. How could it not be personal? This company had been her life. She had worked late nights, skipped vacations, sacrificed weekends. And now, just like that, she was disposable. As security escorted her out, a few co-workers gave her nervous glances. Some avoided eye contact altogether, as if unemployment were contagious. She clutched the box of her belongings, picture frames, a plaque that read Excellence in Financial Leadership, a coffee mug Ethan had made her in 3rd grade with the words World's Best Mom in messy blue paint. What was she supposed to do now? The drive home felt surreal. Marissa kept expecting to wake up, for this to be some cruel stress-induced nightmare. But the reality was inescapable. She had no job. No steady income. No safety net. Her mind raced through the numbers: how much she had in savings, the mortgage payment due next week, Ethan's upcoming college tuition. The math wasn't good. She had always been the one who planned, who prepared for emergencies. But she had never prepared for this. By the time she pulled into the driveway of her suburban home, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows over the lawn she had barely had time to mow these past few months. The house looked the same: white shutters, brick facade, a porch swing she and Ethan had painted together last summer, but it suddenly felt like something fragile, something that could be taken from her at any moment. Inside, Ethan was sprawled on the couch, earbuds in, textbooks open but clearly ignored. He barely glanced up when she entered. Hey, Mom. What's for dinner? Marissa opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. How did she tell him? How did she explain that the life they knew was now hanging by a thread? Mom? She forced a smile, willing her voice to stay steady. Whatever you want, she said. It's your pick tonight. For now, she could pretend everything was fine. For now. Marissa had always been the kind of person who made things work. She had managed tight budgets, raised a son on her own, and built a career from the ground up. So she approached unemployment the same way she approached everything else, with a plan. By the end of the first week, she had updated her resume and applied to a dozen jobs. By the second week, she had doubled that number. By the third, she was waking up early, dressing in crisp blouses for virtual interviews, and pasting on a confident smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And by the fourth week, the rejections started piling up. We've decided to move forward with another candidate. We appreciate your time, but we're looking for someone with a different background. You're an incredibly qualified applicant, but unfortunately. It was always the same pattern. If she made it past the automated rejections, she would get a polite interview, sometimes even a promising one, only to be told, in so many words, that she was either overqualified or not the right fit. It didn't take long to realize what none of them were saying out loud. She was too old. Not old in the way that required a cane or reading glasses, but old enough that hiring managers saw her resume and assumed she wouldn't adapt, that she would demand too high a salary, that she wasn't as hungry as the younger candidates. Marissa had spent years proving herself in boardrooms, showing she could navigate financial crises and corporate restructuring. But none of that mattered now. In the eyes of the job market, she was obsolete. The bills started coming faster than the job offers. At first, she cut back in small ways. She canceled the subscription services she barely used. She stopped going to the fancy grocery store across town and settled for whatever was cheapest at the discount mart. Then came the bigger sacrifices. She sold her jewelry, nothing too sentimental, just the expensive pieces her ex-husband had given her out of guilt before their marriage ended. Then she let go of the gym membership, the weekend movie nights with Ethan, the little luxuries that made life feel normal. She told Ethan it was just budgeting smart, that they were being careful, but the unspoken truth lingered in the air between them. He had started noticing the changes. One evening, as he set the table for dinner, he hesitated. "Mom, why are we eating ramen again?" Marissa stirred the pot on the stove, the familiar scent of artificial chicken flavor filling the air. "Because it's easy," she said, keeping her tone light. Ethan frowned. "You used to make real dinners." A knot formed in her stomach. She wanted to tell him that things were fine, that this was temporary, but the lie tasted bitter in her mouth. Instead, she turned to him with a forced smile. "Well, this way, you'll be fully prepared for college dorm life." Ethan let out a half-hearted laugh, but the look in his eyes told her he wasn't convinced. A month passed. Then another. By the time spring arrived, the savings had dwindled to almost nothing. The severance package had covered the essentials for a while, but without a steady income, it wasn't enough. And then came the letter. She found it in the mailbox one morning, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a utility bill she had been avoiding. A crisp white envelope, the bank's logo embossed in the corner. She already knew what it said before she even opened it. Final notice, foreclosure proceedings initiated. Her hands trembled as she read the words. They weren't just numbers on a page. They were a countdown, a warning that the house she had raised Ethan in, the house she had fought so hard to keep after the divorce, was slipping away. She pressed the letter against her chest, breathing through the wave of panic threatening to consume her. She had failed. She had failed Ethan. Failed herself. For the first time since losing her job, Marissa felt something she hadn't let herself feel before: helplessness. That night, Ethan found her sitting on the back porch, staring into the darkness. "Mom," he said hesitantly, stepping outside. "Are you okay?" She swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "Yeah. Just thinking." Ethan hesitated before sitting beside her. He was taller than she remembered, his frame no longer that of the little boy who used to curl up in her lap. He was almost a man now, and yet, at that moment, he looked so much like the child she had spent her life protecting. "Is it bad?" he asked quietly. Marissa considered lying, softening the truth. But she was tired. She let out a shaky breath. "Yeah," she admitted. "It's bad." Ethan didn't say anything for a long time. Then, without a word, he reached over and squeezed her hand. Marissa closed her eyes, holding on to that small, simple gesture like a lifeline. She wasn't alone. Not yet. Marissa had spent years preparing for worst-case scenarios. She had emergency savings, a carefully structured budget, none of which had prepared her for this. A final notice meant time had run out. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a deadline. She had 30 days to vacate. 30 days to figure out where she and Ethan were going to sleep. She sat at the kitchen table that evening, the foreclosure letter spread out before her like a puzzle she couldn't solve. Her hands gripped a pen tightly, trying to make sense of numbers that didn't add up. The mortgage was too far behind. Her severance package was long gone. Unemployment checks barely covered utilities and food. She had no job offers, no fallback, no magic solution. She had nothing left to sell. Across from her, Ethan sat with his laptop open, pretending to do homework. But every few minutes, he glanced up at her, watching. Mom, his voice was hesitant. Can we talk? Marissa didn't look up. Of course. What's up? Ethan hesitated. I found this thing at school. A program. They have emergency housing for students whose families are going through, tough times. Her head snapped up. No. Mom. I said no, she repeated, her voice sharper than she intended. We are not homeless. Ethan flinched but didn't back down. But we're about to be, right? The words hung in the air like a slap. Marissa's grip on the pen tightened until her knuckles turned white. Ethan, she said carefully, I promise you, we're going to be fine. But even as she said it, she knew he didn't believe her. Because she didn't believe it either. The house didn't feel like home anymore. She started packing the next day, not because she had anywhere to go, but because it was easier to pretend she was in control. She boxed up framed photos, folded clothes into neat stacks, labeled everything like she was preparing for an organized move, not an eviction. As she packed, she let herself pretend, for a moment, that they were just downsizing. That this was her choice. But it wasn't. And the worst part? No one was coming to save her. By the end of the week, reality settled in. She had nowhere to go. She had applied for affordable housing programs, only to be met with waiting lists 6 months long. She had reached out to shelters, only to be told they were at capacity. Her pride had kept her from asking for help, but now? Now, she was desperate. She finally called Linda. Her old friend picked up on the second ring. Marissa? Marissa took a shaky breath. Her voice cracked. She hadn't cried yet. Not once. But standing there, surrounded by half-packed boxes in a house she could no longer afford, the dam finally broke. I need help. There was silence on the other end, then a soft, understanding voice. Come by the center tomorrow. We'll figure something out. The next morning, she drove to Linda's nonprofit organization, a women's support center that helped those struggling with job loss, domestic violence, and homelessness. The waiting room was packed. Women sat in plastic chairs, clutching bags of clothes, filling out forms, looking like she felt. She hated being here. Hated that she needed help. Linda found her near the entrance and pulled her into a quick hug. I'm so glad you came. Marissa managed a weak smile. I didn't have much of a choice. Linda nodded knowingly. No one ever does. They sat in Linda's office, and for the first time, Marissa told someone everything. The job loss. The failed applications. The foreclosure. The fear of what came next. Linda listened without interrupting. When Marissa finished, she leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. You're not alone, Marissa. And you're not the first woman to sit in that chair feeling like the world just ended. Marissa let out a shaky breath. But what do I do now? Linda pulled a notepad toward her. First, we find you a place to stay. It won't be fancy, but we'll make sure you and Ethan aren't sleeping in your car. Marissa stiffened. I never said. Linda gave her a pointed look. I know you, Marissa. You'd rather sleep in your car than ask for help. Marissa looked away. Linda sighed. Look, I have a few options. There's an emergency motel program. Or I can talk to a few people, maybe find you a temporary rental. Marissa swallowed the lump in her throat. Okay. And second, Linda continued, we get you working again. Marissa let out a bitter laugh. Easier said than done. Linda smiled knowingly. I have a job for you. Marissa blinked. What? We need someone to help with financial literacy workshops, teaching women here how to budget, rebuild credit, start over. Marissa hesitated. It wasn't a corporate position. It wasn't 6 figures and an office with a view. But it was something. And right now, something was everything. She nodded slowly. I'll take it. For the first time in months, the weight on her chest felt just a little lighter. It wasn't much. But it was a start. The first night away from home was the hardest. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and stale carpet, the air conditioner rattling like an old car engine. The bedspread was a scratchy maroon fabric, the kind designed to withstand years of wear rather than provide any real comfort. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the muted television. He hadn't said much since they arrived. Marissa knew he was processing it all, the loss of their house, the reality of where they were now. She had tried to make it seem like an adventure. Think of it as a staycation, she had joked earlier, forcing a smile. But Ethan wasn't a little kid anymore. He saw through it. Now, as she stood in the small kitchenette, unpacking what little food they had, a box of cereal, a few cans of soup, she finally asked the question she had been avoiding. "Are you okay?" Ethan didn't look at her. "I don't know." The answer was honest. Marissa swallowed hard. "It's not forever," she said softly. "We'll find a place. I just need some time." Ethan nodded, but she wasn't sure if he believed her. She wasn't sure if she believed her. The next morning, she woke before sunrise. For the first time in months, she had somewhere to be. A job. Even if it wasn't the kind of job she had imagined for herself, even if it wasn't the corner office and a six-figure salary, it was something. She dressed carefully, smoothing down the sleeves of her blouse, willing herself to look put together, even if inside, she still felt like she was falling apart. Ethan was still asleep when she left. She paused at the door, watching him for a moment. He looked younger in sleep. Less burdened. She wished she could freeze time, just for a little while, give them both a moment to breathe before reality came crashing down again. But she couldn't. So instead, she stepped outside, shut the door behind her, and drove to her new life. The women's center was nothing like the offices she was used to. There were no glass conference rooms, no high-backed executive chairs. The break room smelled like burnt coffee, and the filing cabinets were dented and mismatched. But it was warm. Women filled the space, some with young children clinging to their legs, some sitting in quiet conversation, some staring at their paperwork with the same lost expression Marissa had worn just days ago. She recognized that look. The fear. The exhaustion. The weight of trying to keep it all together. Linda greeted her at the front desk, handing her a stack of folders. "Your first class is at 10. Financial literacy for single moms." Marissa blinked. "You're just throwing me in?" Linda smirked. "You'll be fine." Fine. Marissa wasn't sure if she had been fine in a long time. But when she stepped into the small classroom, the women inside turned toward her, expecting something. She took a breath. "Hi," she said. "I'm Marissa. And I know exactly how it feels to be sitting where you are right now." The room fell silent. She hadn't planned to say that. But once the words were out, she couldn't stop. "I was laid off 5 months ago. I lost my house last week. And I'm still trying to figure out what happens next." A woman in the back, probably in her late 20s, a toddler balanced on her lap, shifted forward. "Wait, you lost your house too?" Marissa nodded. The woman let out a breath. "I thought I was the only one." A murmur of agreement spread through the room. Marissa gripped the edge of the desk. The corporate world had taught her how to present, how to analyze data, how to command a room. But this wasn't about commanding. This was about connection. She set the folders aside. "Let's start with the basics," she said. "How many of you are struggling with budgeting right now?" Every single hand went up. Marissa exhaled slowly, something shifting inside her. Maybe this wasn't the life she had planned. But maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something new. The days at the women's center passed in a blur. At first, Marissa struggled to find her footing. Teaching financial literacy wasn't the same as managing corporate accounts or negotiating with investors. The women she worked with weren't interested in stock portfolios or tax loopholes. They wanted to know how to stretch a paycheck until the end of the month. How to negotiate rent when they were already behind. How to feed their kids when the fridge was empty. She wasn't sure if she could help them at first. After all, she was still trying to help herself. But as the days passed, she realized something unexpected. She wasn't just teaching. She was learning. One afternoon, after class, a woman named Tasha approached her. She was in her early 30s, with tired eyes and a nervous energy that reminded Marissa of herself. "I just wanted to say thanks," Tasha said hesitantly. "For, actually listening. Most people just tell us to work harder or budget better, but you get it." Marissa offered a small smile. "Because I've been there." Tasha nodded, shifting from foot to foot. "Yeah, but you don't have to be here. You could probably get some fancy finance job again, right?" Marissa hesitated. Before, she would have agreed without question. Of course, she would go back. Of course, this was temporary. But now, she wasn't sure anymore. Meanwhile, things with Ethan were changing, too. He had picked up more shifts at the cafe, bringing home small paychecks that he tried, unsuccessfully, to hide from her. "I can help with groceries," he said one night, setting a $20 bill on the counter. Marissa frowned. "Absolutely not." Ethan crossed his arms. "Mom, I want to help." She stared at the bill, her pride battling against the reality of their situation. Finally, she sighed. "Okay. But we're using it for something fun." Ethan rolled his eyes. "We can't afford fun." Marissa smirked. "Then we'll have to get creative." That Friday, they spent exactly $20 on gas station hot dogs, a pack of Oreos, and a movie rental from the red box outside the convenience store. It wasn't a five-star dinner. It wasn't the life they used to have. But for the first time in a long time, they laughed. And somehow, that felt more valuable than anything money could buy. A month passed. Then another. They were still in the motel. It wasn't ideal, but it was stable, for now. Then, one afternoon, Linda pulled her aside. "I have an opportunity for you," she said. Marissa raised an eyebrow. "Another workshop?" Linda shook her head. "A full-time position. Director of Financial Programs. It's yours if you want it." Marissa blinked. "Director? That's a big title," she said slowly. Linda smirked. "Yeah, well, you've earned it. You've helped more women in 2 months than some people do in years." Marissa's heart pounded. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance. A chance to rebuild, not just her career, but her purpose. She had spent so long thinking her value came from a paycheck, from a title, from an office with a view. But maybe her worth was something else entirely. She exhaled, looking around the center, at the women, the kids, the community. Then, she smiled. "I'll take it." That night, she and Ethan sat in their motel room, eating microwaved mac and cheese. "I got a promotion today," she said casually. Ethan looked up. "Seriously?" Marissa nodded. "Full-time. Director of Financial Programs." Ethan grinned. "So, we're gonna be okay?" Marissa reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "We already are." For the first time in months, she believed it. They had lost their house. They had lost so much. But somehow, they had found something greater. And this time, no one could take it away. 1 year ago, Marissa had stood in her kitchen, staring at a foreclosure notice, feeling like her entire world was caving in. Now, she stood in a different kitchen, one with mismatched cabinets and a fridge that hummed too loudly. It wasn't the sprawling suburban home she had lost. It was smaller, humbler. But it was theirs. The new apartment wasn't perfect. The walls were thin. The neighbors were loud. The water pressure in the shower was inconsistent at best. But when Marissa turned the key in the lock each evening after work, it felt like a victory. She had fought for this. She had rebuilt her life from nothing. And most importantly, she had done it on her own terms. Ethan was thriving. College was still on the horizon, but now, it didn't feel like an impossible dream. He had secured a partial scholarship, and between his savings and a financial aid package, he was set to attend a local university. He had once dreamed of going out of state, of leaving this town behind. But when the acceptance letters arrived, he surprised her. "I think I want to stay," he had said. "At least for a while." Marissa had blinked in surprise. "Are you sure?" Ethan had shrugged. "Yeah. I mean, you and I have been through a lot. I kind of want to be around for what comes next." She had hugged him then, unable to find the right words. At work, Marissa no longer felt like an outsider. The Women's Center had become more than just a job. It was a purpose. A place where she could take everything she had been through, every loss, every setback, every lesson, and turn it into something that helped others. She saw herself in the women who walked through the doors. She saw their fear, their exhaustion, their quiet resilience. And she told them what she wished someone had told her in those first few weeks of losing everything. "You are more than your worst day. You are not broken. You will find your way again." Some of them believed her. Some didn't. But she kept showing up. Because she understood now, healing wasn't instant. It was a slow, steady process. And for the first time in a long time, she was okay with that. One evening, she and Ethan drove past their old neighborhood. The house they had lost still stood there, unchanged. The porch swing they had painted together was still hanging, though someone had repainted it a dull brown. She half expected to feel something: grief, regret, longing. But all she felt was peace. Ethan glanced over. "Do you miss it?" Marissa thought for a moment. Then, she smiled. "No," she said simply. And she meant it. Because she had finally learned something that had taken her 45 years to understand. A home wasn't a house. It wasn't walls or a mortgage or a neighborhood. It was this. This life. This moment. This second chance. And for the first time since she had lost everything, she wasn't afraid anymore. She was free. Closing message for the video. Life has a way of testing us in ways we never expect. Marissa's story is not just about losing a job or a home, it's about resilience, reinvention, and the power of starting over. So many people face hardships like hers every day: job loss, financial struggles, the fear of not knowing what comes next. But what this story teaches us is that rock bottom isn't the end. Sometimes, it's the beginning of something new. Marissa found strength in places she never expected: in her son, in the women around her, and most importantly, in herself. She lost everything she thought defined her, only to discover that her true worth was never in a job title, a paycheck, or even a house. Her real value was in her ability to keep going, to keep fighting, and to build a life that mattered, not just for herself, but for others. Speech balloon: what do you think about Marissa's journey? Do you see yourself in her struggles? What would you have done in her situation? Tell us in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and found it inspiring, comment number 2 below. If you think it could have been better, comment number 7 and tell us why. Thumbs up. Don't forget to like this video if you want to see more real-life stories that move and inspire. Bell subscribe to EN True Tales with Hannah to hear more incredible stories that will make you think, feel, and maybe even change the way you see the world. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.